afternoon. Welcome to today's TASA webinar, 5 Legal Liability Issues for Schools. This webinar will cover 5 key issues related to safety and security problems in elementary, middle, and high schools. During this program, our presenters will cover the following: lack of accurate understanding of safety issues, planning without assessment, guessing is not planning, reaction, not prediction, poor management of schools, the real issue in school safety, lack of effective plans to combat truancy and lateness. Truancy is the root of all school safety issues. And finally, poor emergency management. Don't ask amateurs without training to do what professionals do. Today's webinar will feature 2 national security safety experts. Andy Demidont is retired from the Pennsylvania public school system after more than 35 years of service. During Andy's tenure in public education, he held various positions, including assistant principal, high school principal, and superintendent. Andy taught graduate education courses at Mansfield State University. He has been nominated to serve on a statewide task force on restructuring the education system in Pennsylvania. And Andy is also the recipient of numerous state and national awards. Today's program also features Dale Yeager. Dale began his career, his education, as a criminal analyst in 1988. Dale received advanced training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Dale's company, SERAPH, has provided security and safety consulting to more than 26,000 schools and higher education entities in the United States. Dale has lectured at many higher education institutions throughout the U.S., such as Drexel and Howard Universities. He's an instructor for the Newman University Criminal Justice Program. In 2002, Dale was given a presidential appointment to the U.S. Selective Service System, and in 2004, he became a member of the FBI InfraGuard program. Dale is also a federal law enforcement trainer for the HIDA and McLaughlin programs. We will take questions throughout today's program. If you have a question, please use the chat feature located on the right-hand side of the screen to submit your questions. The presenters will do their best to answer your questions in the order in which they come. Tomorrow morning, I will send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this program. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after today's program is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to turn the presentation over to our distinguished guests, Mr. Andy Demidont and Dale Yeager. Guys, the program is all yours.
Hello, this is Dale Yeager. Welcome everyone to another webinar on school safety, certainly a relevant one after what occurred in December at Sandy Hook Elementary School. We will be talking about that, and one of the things we'll be talking about is the 3 ways that it was preventable and what those failures were, because it's important whether you are an attorney who represents school systems or private schools, or if you're an attorney who has actions pending against a school system, this webinar will be relevant to both places, both positions. So we'll move forward into our 5 issues, but before we do that, we're going to need to talk about some facts. And one of the things that we are very adamant about at SERAPH is making sure that we source everything. So you'll notice at the bottom of this slide, this information comes from the Juvenile Justice Bulletin and OJJDP down in Washington, D.C. It's very important that whatever type of attorney you are, either working on defense or plaintiff in education, that you know the facts, and this information is free of charge. 2.7 million crimes are committed at schools every year in the United States. Of those 2.7 million, 73% are in suburban and rural schools. So when people say that urban schools are the primary problem, statistically that's not true. Every type of school system has issues. The question really is, do the administrators, does the school board of that school system actually know what all their issues are, or are they guessing at them? We'll talk about that later. Students ages 12 through 18 were more likely to be victims of non-fatal violent crimes such as rape, sexual assault, robbery, and aggravated assault. Total crimes committed in schools to this age group are 253,000. By the way, 60% of those crimes are committed in rural and suburban schools. By the way, the Justice Department also includes parochial schools in these numbers. So private schools are also included, not just public schools. Teachers are the victims of over 400,000 violent crimes each year in the United States. Now, we need to break down this statistic because it's a very general statistic. The number one group for assaulting teachers, and by the way, in the case of the Department of Justice, teacher refers to teacher, teacher's aide, principal, or school counselor. So they use this as a general term. It's primarily the educators in the classroom, but it also includes those other people. Of that, the number one group is students. Not surprising. Right behind them, and only 4 points behind them, are parents and caregivers. Number three, and most important for our discussion right now, are other staff members. What we tend to forget about is that when everyone's focusing on the school shooter, what they're forgetting about is that there are employees, part-time and full-time employees within the school system who are dangerous people. And HR, in many cases, is not doing its job in the hiring practice. They're not doing their homework. And so we're going to be addressing some of those issues as we get into the 5 issues of today's presentation. But it's important that we make data-driven decisions. Yes, Andy.
Let me just interject here while we're talking about this. The data that you're referring to here, just for those of you in attendance during the session, just not merely numbers in a page. It goes to issues like foreseeability. It goes to issues like vicarious liability. It goes to the issues of respondent superior. So all of the facts are in hand. People know these. So on the part of schools, and Dale will touch upon this a little bit later, one of the things that often happens is there has been, for the last 10 years, specific recommendations out to schools to be sure that they do assessments of their particular school's safety and security situations. To ignore that fact and know the numbers that we're seeing right here, you might have been able to get away with it 10, 15, 20 years ago, but not anymore. You can't plead, I didn't know, because the information is there, the warnings have been out there, and to continue to ignore them exposes yourself to an incredible amount of liability. Okay, Dale.
And before we move on, that brings up a whole other issue for those of you listening. When we talk about Sandy Hook, there were 3 ways that this crime could have been prevented. And interestingly, all 3 ways cost no money, and all 3 of those protocols are put out every year in the school safety report that is sent out by the U.S. Department of Education. So again, pleading ignorance doesn't work. The problem is school board members and superintendents are not reading these recommendations from the U.S. Department of Ed, which have been put out since Columbine. So this has been a long, long time. And 2 of those, specifically 2 of those protocols would have prevented this crime in Sandy Hook. We wouldn't even be talking about it today. The 3rd would have significantly reduced the number of people who were injured and killed. And so we'll talk more about that as we go through. But yes, pleading ignorance has not played a role for a long time. So let's talk about the other types of school violence. Again, we focus on school shooters, and I know that's the focus of everybody because of Sandy Hook. But here is an example of what really is going on. Student to student, student to teacher, teacher to student, teacher to staff, staff to student, vendor to student, visitors to student, visitor to teacher. The Department of Justice says that 30% of crimes committed against students in a school are committed by vendors. The person that brings in the soda, the person brings in the food in the back of the cafeteria, the person that sells insurance to your teachers, visitors of all types. Visitors and vendors are committing crimes. And one of the problems is that most schools have a horrible system for visitor management. Most of you will agree that in your schools of your children or the schools you represent, people who are visitors or vendors must come in, they must sign in, they must get a visitor's pass, and then a force field envelops around them so they can't touch anybody. I'm being facetious. The bottom line is that you let these people wander around with a little sign on their hook to their shirt or their blouse, and that doesn't prevent anything. This management of visitors is a key element, and certainly was a key element at Sandy Hook. But again, don't just think about the shooter, think more broadly or holistically with a W. All right, number one, lack of accurate understanding of safety issues. The one question when we're training school administrators, and we've trained hundreds of thousands of them over the last 20 years of the existence of this company in 20 states, we always ask this question: how do you know what your problems are? And they're always going to say the same thing. Excuse me. They're going to say, well, we have meetings and we talk about what the issues are. That's not an answer. Because ultimately, if you don't have a formal system in place to assess your issues, then you can't accurately say what your issues are. And I will tell you that most schools in this country, and I will use a number that is not pulled out of the air, we've thought long and hard about this number, about 90% of all schools in the United States have never had a federal-level security management audit done in their school. What they've had is audits done by security people who know nothing about schools. They've had them done by local police, which is well-meaning, but again, they don't understand educational institutions. When you're looking at your school, you've got to look under every rock, and you have to have a formal process to assess that. One of the things that I like to tell all of you who are listening today is every one of your schools, including private schools, have 2 federally recognized gangs in them. Every school. And I guarantee you that if I go to Facebook, put the name of your school in, as long as it's a high school, so we're talking about 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, if I put in the name of your high school and put in the name Juggalos or Straight Edge, I have yet, there's always a possibility that I could be wrong, but as of yet, I have always found at least one student who is a Juggalo or Straight Edge. These are 2 federally recognized gangs by the Justice Department since 1999. And yet when I say that and show that to administrators, they go, I know the kids that are straight edge. I didn't know they were gang members. People have no clue. And by the way, you'll find straight edge and juggalos and straight edge primarily in suburban and rural schools. So when a school board is asked the question, or a superintendent is asked the question, do you know what's really going on in your school? The answer is, unless they've had that formal process put together where they understand all the systems and have analyzed all those systems and do it on an ongoing basis, the answer has to be no. And that's not appropriate. That's not good leadership. And that's where the liability bomb comes to. Yes, Andy.
Let me just interject two points at this juncture. Dale's talking about what at this point are the very obvious, and by obvious I'm referring to media hyped kinds of events. Okay, there are many other issues that are far less attention grabbing, but just as potentially dangerous in terms of liability to school districts because of the lack of understanding of safety issues, and more importantly, the term formal methods of doing that. We have dealt with situations with schools that have had problems with windows, problems with doors, problems with a variety of physical structure kinds of items, playground equipment. And when we go to those schools, we talk to people and they say, yeah, I knew, but there was no formalized mechanism to share that information within the school system to assure not just identifying what the problem was, but what were the steps that the school district reasonably and prudently took to address those concerns. The same holds true with school districts not availing themselves of local police departments, offices of juvenile justice, offices of probation, and holding. Either my recommendation is at the very minimum quarterly meetings with all of those agencies to get together to establish a relationship so that the sharing of information, which did not take place at Virginia Tech, which did not take place at Columbine, which did not take place in almost every media-type incident that we're all aware of, that may have, note the word, may have helped prevent or at least mitigate to a large degree what happened. And if for nothing else, the school district would have taken reasonable precautionary steps to document those meetings, to share those meetings, and to make sure they make their way up the chain of command within the school district, from building principal to if there's a secondary superintendent and an elementary superintendent, to make sure that it's followed all the way up through the board. We also recommend very, very strongly that at the very least, at least once a year, the administration in that school district perform what I'm going to refer to as a State of the Union address, talking not just about their academic track records, their attendance records, and their disciplinary records, so that the board is aware. We oftentimes criticize board members for not being aware, and the fact is they're not aware, and I can say this because I was a former superintendent, because we didn't do a good job making sure they were educated as to what the real problems were. So these kinds of steps, and to assure that they're formalized, help make sure that the problem is identified, there's an action plan developed, there's a check and balance system put in place to assure that the action plan is working to the degree that we want. These kinds of things, every year you'll find school districts all across this country will prepare student, parent handbooks and board policy reviews, and they make those, unfortunately, all too often, literally by plucking out of the dark. Instead of, if they have this kind of a data available, when that process takes place, when you try to tell a board member why you need certain policies to be in place or certain handbook provisions to be in place, they now have the background data to support why it needs to be done. And furthermore, you have provided the due diligence or started on the process of providing due diligence of what a reasonable and prudent person would do to resolve a problem, not just to rewrite the same handbook. And sometimes, I'm sure this doesn't happen in districts that you folks represent, sometimes when we go through their policies and procedures, we will find that they haven't even changed the names of the people. Emergency plans, where the names of the people responsible have not even been changed in 4, 5, 6 years. You want to talk about exposing yourself to potential serious liability because of what that demonstrates? It demonstrates a sense of how important that organization seems to think that emergency plan is. Okay, Dale, sorry.
Well, no. One of the things I wanted to finish with this segment was that you can only make decisions based on what you can discover and what you know. If you went to a doctor and said, I'm very ill for 2 weeks, and the doctor said, try this pill out, see if that works, and you would look at the doctor and say, wait a minute, aren't you going to diagnose me? But yet we have schools across America who have safety plans and security plans and emergency management plans, and they've never diagnosed their problems. They've done everything backwards. It makes no sense. And I will finish with saying this.
Dale, they've copied them, and we can demonstrate that they've been copied.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What I would finish by saying is this: for 15 years, I was a student of Dr. Peter Drucker, the man who invented what all of us know today as management. And one of the things he used to drive home to us about leadership was that you can only manage what you can measure. And the problem in many schools is that they do not have a formal process for measuring their progress in security, safety, and emergency management. They have no formal process. You cannot manage what you cannot measure. Moving on to number 2, reaction, not prediction. People are patting each other on the back after an event at a school, saying, boy, they really responded well. Wait a minute. An emergency plan never saved anyone's life, generally. It never stopped or prevented something from happening. It's a cleanup list. It's what you do after the action has taken place. The question that we're asking of Sandy Hook, and we're finding out that the answer is pretty sadly no, is was there prevention policies and prevention procedures in place to prevent intrusion? And the answer is no. And they violated basic school safety protocols from the U.S. Department of Education. And there's no excuse for that. Now, we're going to talk candidly in this webinar, and it may seem a little cold or maybe beating up on the school board, but I don't think it is. I think it's holding them accountable. At some point, when all the smoke clears from this, they're going to have to ask themselves some difficult questions, if they ever do. What was our failure? Because if the statement that people are going to make is, well, you can't prevent everything, as a forensic profiler, as a criminal behavior analyst, I get upset by that, because people who make that statement generally aren't even qualified to make it. If you look at the success rate of professional organizations, their success rate at preventing crime is 94%, 96%. So yes, you can prevent almost everything. In forensics, we have the 2% rule. 2% is unpreventable, 98% is preventable. And when people make that statement, they're basically giving up, throwing their hands in the air, and in my opinion, making a statement that is an unqualified opinion. And so, reaction, not prediction. Where is the prediction techniques? Where is the threat management being taught to school administrators, school staff? Wouldn't it be nice to turn your whole staff into a living metal detector? And we do this. We teach a 20-minute segment in our training on how to identify if someone's carrying a weapon and specifically what weapon they're carrying. Teach the same thing to police officers. After that 20-minute session, sometimes we can do it in 15, we put training weapons on the adults in the room, make them walk around, 10 of them usually, with 3 weapons on someone, and they come in, no one knows who has the weapon. Literally within seconds, people are picking up who has the weapon and what kind of weapon they have. This is teachable. Turning the whole staff into a radar system is much better than relying on equipment, which is not prediction. Equipment is not prediction. Go ahead, Andy.
Again, back to the reaction, not prediction. The sad fact here is that the capability within most schools' SMS systems, student management software, in conjunction with state requirements, if you're in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, you are required to each year provide to the state departments of education, and I'm assuming that that holds true in a lot of other states, but those 3 come to my mind right now. You are required to do school violence reports, okay? That data is in schools, and it's readily available in their student management systems. And if it's not, to make it available and to make it easily available to teachers. And by that I mean, a lot of times you'll hear administrators say, well, that's so much more work. Well, we actually can show you how using your current student management system at little or no extra cost, you can wind up taking the data that you collect and are required to collect as far as incidents that occur in your school and use it as a tool to predict what may happen the following year and to help when you prepare policies, to help when you prepare your annual reviews of student and faculty and parent handbooks. So the fact that that stuff is available today, again, goes to the nature of foreseeability. You could have easily foreseen some of these things if you had provided the due diligence necessary. And you can't use cost, because the cost in many of these cases, the two reasons you hear oftentimes for things not getting done in education is it's too expensive or I don't have the people. We can demonstrate to schools, and have demonstrated to schools, how without increasing staff and without a whole lot of extra money, if any at all, depending on what their current structure is, you can provide that kind of information, get it out to the board, get it out to the central office staff, so that people have the data necessary to make sound decisions. Our philosophy basically is when people have unbiased, real, accurate data, they generally will make the right decisions. Okay, Dale.
Well, the other issue too is that if you're an attorney listening to this webinar today and you have an action pending against a school system, you have to also consider their data collection in your discovery and in your assessment of your lawsuit, and how that lack of data collection, or how the data was collected and how it was used in policy and in management, affected your client. And so, we're talking today to both sides of you, both defense and plaintiff, and so it's important to understand that data is relevant to lawsuits. Next is number 3, poor management of schools, poor time management, non-database decisions, unwillingness to depart from conventional thinking. Let me stop there for a moment. Almost every state in the United States has a portal-to-portal law. Now, they call it different things, but basically what it means is this. You as a school system are required to protect. You are responsible for that student from their door back to their door. Nothing aggravates us more than to see school systems who allow their seniors to go out for lunch unattended. That is a violation of state law. It's a violation of common sense, and it's a violation of the basic school safety protocols from the federal government. When you let those students go out, they're unattended. You have no control over them. You're violating that law. So if you're an attorney representing schools, I know what you're going to hear, because we hear it too. Well, that's been a tradition for a long time. There are many things that have been traditions that are not safe for students, and they need to stop. And this is just one example of conventional thinking. Well, we've always done it this way. This is the way it's always been done. Next is school boards being asked to make decisions without essential data. I've asked school board members, because we are partnered with several state school board associations, do you believe what your superintendent tells you? And they look at me and they say, well, of course. I said, why? Why don't you require your superintendent and your department heads to prove to you in writing what they are saying? Well, we don't want to offend them. And this is part of the leadership vacuum that we see in schools, is school boards assuming that what they're being told is true and not asking good questions and not having the data to make those important decisions. This is important.
Let me tie those two together. Two together. The student lunch releases that Dale referred to, and how school boards oftentimes arrive at that decision. You want to talk about increasing your potential problem in terms of liability. Oftentimes what you'll see is that the justification for doing it is because we don't have room in the cafeteria, and that there are minutes and records that are publicly available that demonstrate that the decision to release the kids on their own without supervision was primarily or partly based on the fact that the school discussed the fact that they didn't have enough room in the cafeteria. Okay.
Which is it's just a lack of management on their part. Poor use of technology to handle the mundane tasks. All of you have been in schools that have cameras. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a video surveillance camera that had cognitive function or peripheral vision? And the answer is no. Only human beings have cognitive function, reasoning capability, and peripheral vision. And so ultimately, equipment does not solve the problem. Let me give you an example. 6 months, and you can go to Google News and read the news report. 6 months to the day of the Columbine shooting, they had installed a ridiculously a high amount of security equipment, $1 million in security equipment in that high school. That very day, a student walked in with a loaded 9mm. Why didn't the metal detectors go off? Because the principal had told the people in the office to turn off the metal detector at 10 a.m. to save on electricity. They were using equipment they didn't need to use, they didn't know how to use the equipment, and they were not well managed. So again, equipment is secondary to human involvement. So if you're an attorney representing a school system, you need to emphasize this, that they cannot rely on equipment to do the job of human beings. Go ahead.
Let me jump in, Dale, at this point, too, because I cannot overemphasize enough, as a former superintendent of schools, how critical what Dale just said was. What we find all too often when schools have implemented the technology portion alone, okay, without changing the culture of responsibility, staff responsibility and duty for safety and security, the technology actually serves to the detriment, because everyone kind of breathes a sigh of relief and says, oh, we have cameras, we have metal detectors, so we're now done being responsible for kids who skip out, for kids who don't show up. Nothing could be further from the truth. As to the technology itself, let me give you a classic illustration of what we see when schools invest in technology. As we all know, monies tend to be tight in most school districts. I don't know of a school district yet that has an unlimited budget. So they'll put out a proposal for a product, cameras, recorders. Let's just leave it with that. Contact devices for doors. And they'll get those proposals back and sticker shock sets in. So without, again, having we provide school districts rubrics to score the proposals to see if you get a certain product that you match the product with the other tools necessary to make it maximal in terms of its efficiency. The budget gets tight, they cut, they'll buy high-end cameras. Let's just stay with that. And they'll buy recorders because they can't afford to buy them. They'll buy cheap recorders and have wasted basically the money because the recorder is not capable of providing clear pictures that are usable pictures for anyone that is doing an investigation of any type. Today, in today's market, school districts are buying cameras that, for the most part, unless they're H.214 cameras, are not getting the maximum effect. And they're buying more and more of the cheaper end cameras that, again, you could probably buy half as many of the high-end H.214 cameras and get the best bang for your buck. So it's crucial, and you know, as a former educator, I get tired of people blaming us as educators for all of the faults and sins of public education. But I know my training, and I know what training most educators got that graduated recently. Very few educators, people in positions of education, were provided the technical training to understand what an H.214 camera is and to understand what contact devices are and why, and under certain circumstances, certain contacts don't work. Yet they're being asked then, because they represent the district, to make a determination of what's the most effective tool to be used. Based on what training? Back to Dale's first slide. Back to what training? Where did that come from? And we're asking board members to make those determinations. Based on what? So the technology, 2 points that I leave you with. One, whatever technology you use cannot be effectively implemented unless you make the entire school and change that school's cultural awareness as to the individual responsibility, from the bus driver to the cafeteria worker to the classroom teacher to the principal, that they're all ultimately responsible for safety and security policies and procedures. And then secondly, when you do the equipment purchases, please, if you want the best bang for your buck, make sure you provide people with the necessary skills, or at least you rely on people that have the skills to get you the best information available at the best possible price.
Moving on, lack of effective, ongoing, interactive, community-wide communications. This is critically important. As Andy talked before, at least quarterly. I think we believe it should be sooner than that, but at least quarterly, working with local entities, coordinating your efforts with them, and then making sure that on a weekly basis, at least on a weekly basis, that you're reaching out to people within the community, to parents, and communicating with them. Many times school systems will only have a news conference when something bad happens or when they're being criticized. Every week there should be communication going out to the local radio stations, the local newspapers, saying, here are the positive things we're doing, here's what we're involved in. That kind of communication is so critically important to having an effective school safety plan, because you want that buy-in from the community leaders and from the parents. So number 4, lack of effective plans to combat truancy and lateness. So truancy is the root of all school safety problems. This is something we've said for many years. So let me explain what that means. When you look at children who are involved in negative behavior cliques, gangs, who are doing sex assault, who are involved in bullying, you will find certain characteristics. They are coming from dysfunctional families. We all know that. But let's define dysfunction. One of those dysfunctions that you'll find is a parent or caregiver who is not involved in that child's life. And what's happening is that they're coming to school late, or or not coming to school at all. And we also know in forensics that lateness is a key element in the development of juvenile sex offenders. And if you think that's not a big issue, the last 4 years in the United States and Canada, the fastest growing group of sex offenders in the last 4 years is juvenile females. And so it's important to understand how truancy plays a role in this. It's also a management issue, which Andy can say some things about. It's a management issue in managing the schools, because if you're not getting your truancy under control, one of the problems is under NCLB, No Child Left Behind, you are required to keep data on lateness. Many administrators and school board members, most that we've talked to, have no idea that there's a lateness clause in NCLB. And they're going to be very surprised and shocked when they have to go through that process of being compliant. But this lateness issue is a key issue. Andy, you want to say some things about that?
The only thing I want to say is that there's a great misunderstanding in this state and most others as to that lateness and tardy and what it really means. Beyond NCLB, one of the provisions that exists in virtually every state are Child Protective Services Acts. The key element of those acts, most people know the physical abuse the sexual abuse and exploitation part. What they do not know is there is a neglect provision. And students, parents, and schools can be held in neglect if a student is absent from school frequently, is late and tardy, and then has demonstrated by his academic records, his or her academic records, that he or she is 2 grade levels below. The statute in Pennsylvania very simply says and prohibits an act or failure to act resulting in physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or emotional and mental injury, okay, except for religious or poverty reasons. But the key is neglect. The school, when it permits a student to be frequently absent, frequently tardy, or frequently truant, has a risk of potentially being negligent. But the school also has a recourse in that situation. Go to family court, file under the Child Protective Statutes a neglect action against the parents. If you can demonstrate that academically the kid is suffering, which in most cases is not very difficult to do. Okay.
Okay. Lastly, poor emergency management. Here's the key question that we always ask and investigate when we're doing a security management audit. Have the special ed teachers been trained in emergency management for special needs children? And the answer has always been no. And the problem is that there's an assumption that special ed teachers know how to handle special needs children during an emergency, and that assumption is very dangerous. The assumption is wrong. And part of the emergency management process involves also the psychology of adults. We have something at Columbine that those of us in forensics call the Dirty 38. Some of you may have heard of this term. What that means is that 38% of the teachers abandoned their students and ran out of the building at Columbine. We have recordings of this. And so when schools say, well, you know what, we're going to when we discuss this issue of emergency management, and people say, well, everybody that's on my staff is going to actually stay, they're living in a Barbie dream house up on the top floor. Not everybody is going to stay. Some people are going to pass out. Some people are not going to be there. They're going to be away or on vacation. Some are going to be injured. Some are going to be dead. And some are going to run away. Some are going to panic. And so ultimately you have to figure into your emergency plan the 40% rule. And here's the 40% rule. Can 40% of your 40% of your adult staff, can they actually manage an emergency with all of your students? So if you take the number of students you have in the school system and what the number comes to of 40% of the adults, that's what you base your emergency plan on. Most schools are assuming that everybody's going to stay. That's not true. And there are stories coming out of Sandy Hook by law enforcement that some staff members did run. And so bottom line is that this has to be factored in. But also, more importantly, is the special ed needs. Because what happens with a child who has some spectrum of a mental condition like autism, they will panic. They will react very aggressively or violently or just lay on the floor. And you know what it's like to pick up dead weight. So it's critically important that people understand the issue of emergency management, because that's really a major factor in a lot of injuries and a lot of the lawsuits that you're dealing with both on either side. So very important. So what we're going to do now is take questions from the audience, and Matt will feed the questions to us, and we'll answer them to our best of our ability. And again, We know that there are attorneys out there who represent schools, and there are attorneys who are having actions against schools, so we're going to answer both of your questions. So, Matt?
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy and Dale. Our first question comes from Bob, who asks, and it's a two-part question. What duties are imposed on a university psychologist or professor concerning disclosure of personal medical information to university staff? And this question is related to HIPAA.
Well, the law, well, let's first talk about the law, and then, Andy, you can talk about HIPAA. The law is very clear, and this is a problem that occurred with Aurora, with the person who shot all those people at the movie theater. If you, as a psychologist, a social worker, psychiatrist, medical doctor, the law is pretty much the same in all 50 states, feel that someone is a danger to themselves or to others, or they are going to commit a crime, you have to call authorities. The authorities are not, in any way, shape, or form, the school administration. And this is part of the problem in universities that we deal with advanced university systems, is that the university deans have this really ridiculously illegal control over their staff. And what they're doing is saying, you don't go to authorities, you come to us first, you could lose your job. This happened at Virginia Tech. And so the situation at the University of Colorado is a very serious issue, because this school psychologist, from what the data says, violated the law in Colorado. And so my answer, from my understanding of these laws, is that they have a requirement to disclose in the event, not so much medical information, because that's covered under federal HIPAA, but in the event that someone is going to be a danger to themselves or someone else, or has said they are going to commit a crime. And suicide is a crime, by the way. So that's what I know of that. Andy, do you want to weigh in on HIPAA?
Basically, you just touched it. You know, if you know a person is going to commit harm to himself or someone else, you have a duty to report it.
Okay, and that probably answers the second part of the question, which asks, if the university psychologist has an opinion that a student is suicidal, must that be disclosed, and if so, to whom?
Well, again, that is each state says either social services or law enforcement. Most of the time, it's law enforcement. And if someone's going to commit suicide, I know that's hard for some of you to comprehend this, but suicide is considered a crime. I mean, attempted suicide, you can be charged with trying to kill yourself. But the thing is that, again, it falls under whether someone is going to be a danger to themselves or others, or they're going to commit a crime. So the answer to that, as far as I know, all 50 states have the same basic law governing the reporting of that by professional people. So that would be my answer. I don't know what your question is in context. So. Well,
Dale, what I would add to that is, you know, that reporting, I would strongly recommend that you be able to verify that you did indeed report it, because that comes into question many times. You know, well, he said, she said. I did report it. No, he didn't. So for your own personal protection, if you're reporting it, I would make sure. And if you report it to a state hotline, you will have that kind of protection. So if you're in a school district or if you're at a university, it depends on what your chain of command in that institution is. But whoever your immediate superior was, that's who I would report it to.
Okay, great. We have two questions here from Sang. The first one asks, what duties does a teacher in investigating why a students are late for class have?
Well, lateness is something that is something that in a school, the principal, the school counselor, the lead teachers there should be a system in place. Any good school would have a system in place to determine why that child is not performing well, and in that performance assessment of the student, they have to consider absenteeism and lateness. So that's something where the teacher and other people on that team assessing that child's problems, family, socioeconomic, whatever they may be, to figure out what that problem is, to intervene. And in the case of a special needs child, well, that's lateness and absenteeism would fall under an IEP, right, Andy?
Yeah, it would be part of neglect if you didn't.
Right.
But for the classroom teacher, you know, the specific kinds of things you want to do. Number one, most schools right now are finally getting around to using some form of electronic SMS system. So if you have a student who is either late, tardy, or absent, you better make sure that you have recorded that you've turned it in. What happens oftentimes is it gets recorded one time and nothing is done follow-up. You also have a duty to follow up. It is then incumbent upon your administration, when they look at the general ledger for student attendance, you know, whatever the provisions are within your state, like in Pennsylvania, you know, the number of days absent requires certain steps. Contact a parent. Can you document that was done? If it's a special needs student, that falls on the teacher and the administration. Did you contact Children and Youth Services? Did you contact the magistrate that Dale referred to earlier? You know, what steps did you take to alleviate the problem? What was that action plan? Did you hold a parent conference? Did you make phone calls? And if you made phone calls, and by the way, most of the proper steps for a regular classroom teacher are getting their derivation from what good special ed teachers always did. And we're finding out that those kinds of steps actually prevent a problem. What kind of parental notification system do you use? In this day and age, for school districts to notify kids of their academic and attendance records once every 9 weeks or every 6 weeks or so, and not have anything intervening is frankly not anywhere near what best practice should be. With your electronic...
Let me say this. That brings up a whole other issue, which is schools should be, at the beginning of each school year, having a legal discussion with the entire staff. So that means that someone needs to come in and give them an understanding of state education law, state law, and local law related to students and children. And that's something that doesn't happen, and that needs to happen, so that they know exactly what does the law state in your state regarding making someone giving information to someone regarding this type of situation. What is the specific law? And that's a briefing that should be done in August before the school year starts, something that we encourage at SERAPH that should be happening. And I think that would solve a lot of the problems, certainly if you're an attorney who represents school systems. So
there's just, again, in this day and age that we live in, there is just no excuse for not keeping a parent informed, a notification system, for not having parents be able to get back to the school personnel, either electronically or physically. In this day and age, there's just no excuse for it. That transfer of information, with the technology that's out there right now, and again, I'm saying it's not going to take any more staff, it's not going to take any more money. With most school student management software today, you can send an alert to every parent in your school district whose kid's absent or late or tardy for class every day. And it wouldn't take but a second of people's time in a given day.
Okay, the second part of the second question that Sang has is what duties does a school have in determining if a student is intoxicated while at school?
Well, every state has a child welfare law. They all have different names and they have different rules, but basically, I'll paraphrase what these laws say. If you know a child is being harmed psychologically or physically, or you actually see it, or know of it, or hear a rumor about it, something to that effect, you have to take action as an adult. And so this would fall under child welfare. And also most states that we work in, the 20 that we work in, also have additional laws that make it that raise that bar even higher for full-time and part-time school employees. They have to take it to another level. So, Andy, you want to comment on that? Or?
I do. I'm going to comment on by reading it right from what the requirements are in my home state. The statute prohibits recent act or failure, note the word, failure to act resulting in physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or emotional mental injury. And Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Oklahoma, North Dakota, New Mexico, Nebraska, Michigan, almost every one of the states that I just mentioned has language very similar to the statutory requirements.
Okay, we have a question here from Jay who asks, are there any technologies that you consider essential in a school building for adequate security? Okay.
Well, that you can't answer that. That's because it all depends on the school. Is the school a California style, one floor, flat roof, built in the late 1950s? Is it a 1920s or 30s stone structure? Is it a brand new structure? I mean, equipment is relevant only to the architecture of that building and how it is used each day. An elementary school would need different equipment in many cases than a high school because the traffic patterns are different. It all depends on much of the architecture and the management of the school.
Just two comments real quickly. Number one, again, the way equipment is purchased, because of, in many cases, the lack of training in their undergraduate or graduate or advanced degree programs, school administrators, when they come to make decisions about what kind of technology they're using, fall prey to good salesmen. You know, I'll give you the classic illustration from an elementary standpoint and from a high school standpoint. You'll get sold a bill of goods to buy motion detectors, okay? Well, anybody who knows how motion detectors work will tell you in a typical high school, and I've seen high schools that have as many as 100, 150. What we know about high schools in America today is they're around-the-clock, almost 7-day-a-week facilities. So how often are the motion detectors getting turned on? So you have wasted a ton of money on motion detectors that have very, very little use because of the nature and culture of that facility. In an elementary school, what we see happening many times is motion detection devices are placed in the hallways of elementary schools. The head custodian leaves on Friday. He readjusts the HVA system for weekend work, and during the weekends, motion detectors, knowing the nature, again, of elementary teachers, they love to hang, and this is a good thing, not a bad thing, wonderful kinds of work that represents their children. Because of the way the HVA system was often set up in the weekend, those whole portraits or papers begin to flow in the area, and they'll trigger the motion detection device. The custodian goes back and forth many, many times, and what we'll find is eventually they just turn them off. So I have no right at all to tell you what's wrong without giving you an idea of what's right. If you're going to use motion detection devices, you deploy them in your high target areas. High target areas, science, nurse's office, the main office, anywhere where you have a safe of some sort. There, your media center, certainly, your media centers are required, would be a good place to start. So without doing the audit, that's the problem. People are buying technology without doing an audit, without first understanding how their people are using the facilities. We've done work with school districts where it's amazing. Before the equipment is placed, we meet with the users of the facility to discuss their patterns, how they use the building. How often administrators find that teachers who have keys are in their buildings late at night or on weekend nights. And so if you put motion devices in place, and those people, without changing those people, you're going to wind up taking a positive and making it a negative. Okay, sorry, Dale. No problem. Any other questions from Adam?
Yeah, we have 2 questions, and then we'll wrap things up here. Sarah asks, did I understand that schools have a duty to report truant behavior to the Child Protective Services? If I misunderstood, please repeat what you believe the school duty is when confronted with truant or other negative behavior.
Okay. Truancy and lateness in the state of New York for several years now is required to be reported. Students who are routinely late or absent, that is required by state law to be reported to social services. The problem is that most school districts are not reporting it to social services. They're violating state law because social services doesn't want to deal with it. It was a law that was put together without thinking first, and so they don't even do it anymore. They just handle everything internally. But in most states, the responsibility falls on the school administration and of each school and of the school district to deal with truancy and lateness. Under federal law, under No Child Left Behind, you must keep accurate data about lateness and absenteeism of students. So did that answer your question, hopefully?
Let me just follow up with that a little further, too. What I was advocating was to utilize their services in the intervention process by building the kind of relationships that I was talking about, so that we make sure we clarify that.
Right. Next, Matt, we have a lot of good questions.
This will be the final question from William, who asks, how do you handle staff refusal to follow district procedures for protection of students? This is with regard to releasing students during the school day to someone not on the student emergency card without contacting the custodial parent.
Well, by doing that, they're violating the law in any jurisdiction, because you cannot, as a school system, I don't know of any state that doesn't have a very specific law about your to who gets to take custody of a child, and that has to be a registered caregiver or parent, and that came about because of all the divorce situations with that situation of parents, fighting over custody of children. So I don't know of any state that allows you to hand over someone, a child to any child to someone who's not registered with your school as a legal guardian. So they're violating the law, and it also sounds to me like very bad management on the part of the principals not managing their staff. Andy, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, the question of refusal, I mean, how do you handle it? Document the first one, make sure there's warnings, document an action plan for corrective measures, and I can't imagine a teachers association in the country that would defend a teacher who blatantly ignored those statutory provisions. I can't imagine it. But the key is, did the administration follow the necessary steps to document, to develop an action plan for corrective measures, and then to monitor it and keep on? And I refuse to believe that a professional association in this country would defend that kind of behavior, because they're exposing not only the teachers are exposing themselves to personal litigation, they're exposing the child to harm, they're exposing the organization to a great deal of institutional liability. So as long as it's documented and you follow whatever your local district contracted policies and procedures are for teacher discipline, I can't imagine it's going to be ignored, or a non-professional staff, if that's what it is. One thing I want to say before we go, and it deals with the Connecticut situation, and it doesn't deal with all of the highlighted stuff, but what it does deal with is emergency plans. I submit to all of you that are listening today, one of the things that, as time withers away from that incident, that is going to get more and more focus and has gotten almost none at this point, is if you see the scenes of how parents were coming to get their kids out of school, the school's emergency plan, evacuation plan, and secure place plan, you're going to start seeing the focus on there. You saw pictures on the TV cameras of parents walking right in the midst of a lot of the activity, pulling their kids out. That's far from what you would want desirable in an emergency plan. So,
right.
Okay. Dale and Andy, can we just do one last question? It has to deal with actually technology and kids using technology, and I think it's important to touch on this third. We have a question here from Adam who says that there was an attack and a robbery outside the school, and it was recorded by it was a student-on-student violence, and the students who took part in the violence recorded it on their cell phones, and they wanted to post it on Facebook, the video. Well, the school found the kids and took their phones, but they deleted the video from the phone and did not turn the video over to authorities. What responsibility does the school district have to preserve that?
That staff, Matt and Adam, committed a crime, and that is called obstruction of justice, and they can be prosecuted for that. You cannot destroy, manipulate evidence of a crime. If this girl got attacked and she was punched just one time, that's assault, okay? If there was injury or a weapon involved, that's aggravated assault. She was at least you're looking at least at a simple assault. And then she was robbed, so that's another crime. And they erased the evidence of a crime. I mean, they can be prosecuted. We're talking about a felony.
Did that take place in school? Do we know if that? Do we know if in school?
It
Did
does
it
not
happen in
say
school
where
or outside school?
Place. It does not say. It was on the school premises in the yard.
Okay, so it was on premise.
Yes.
It's a crime. It's evidence of
evidence
of a crime. Wow. I'm amazed that the county prosecutor or the city district attorney didn't prosecute them if they find out. I mean, that's a crime. That's obstruction of justice. That's as bad as it gets right there. So that's our answer to that. They committed a crime. So no other words for it. So.
Okay.
But anyway,
why don't we wrap
Matt,
up
I just wanted to say, Matt, thank you, everybody. You had great questions, and if you need to talk to us, Matt can arrange for that to happen. And thank you for listening today.
Thank you, folks.
Just very quickly, wrapping things up, I want to thank Dale and Andy for putting together a great presentation as usual. And as they said, if you would have any questions for them, follow-up questions, or want to talk about a specific case or matter that you're working on, you can give us a call here at 800-523-2319. Tomorrow morning, I'll send out a link to the archive recording of this program. Included in that email will be a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. This program, as well as all of our previous programs, will be posted in the Knowledge Center on our website. You visit tasanet.com and click on the Knowledge Center tab at the top of the page. You'll be able to view all of our webinars. And our next webinar for legal professionals will take place on Tuesday, January 22nd, and the focus of that one is student safety door-to-door. We'll be talking about student transportation from portal to portal. And finally, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email me at mhyde@tasanet.com. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at future TASA programs.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Matt.
Yep, thank you.